Tendering as a process, and also what type of documentation is required for tendering. So what is tendering? Tendering, remember, is a procurement process. Procurement process is how do we purchase a building, construction. That's procurement. So tendering is a process that is underneath procurement. So tendering is a process a contractor, you, undertake to bid a project. Tendering is a bidding process. You will build my house for $1 million. You will build my house for $950,000. Okay? It's cheaper. So that is your bid. Which one do I pick? Do I pick the one who's saying $1 million, or do I pick the one saying $950,000? In a traditional method, I would pick the lowest price. What's the problem with picking the lowest price? I'm taking a risk. This person said $1 million. Well, why did they say $1 million? So you are taking a $50,000 risk on a lower price. And generally we will say that I am taking on the risk for your mistake because you have underbid the project. So this is the traditional way of doing construction, and so this is why we always have disputes. Okay, because we go with the lowest price. And as soon as we start the project, we are fighting about money. We're fighting about quality. We're fighting about time. Okay, so you have to have confidence in the process. You have to have confidence in the person or the firm or the company that's saying, I will do it for a lower price. So there are other factors just as well as price that you might consider in your tender, the evaluation of your tenders. And that is the experience and the quality of the firm or the company. And so quite often on larger projects, along with the price, there is a whole tender submission document that goes with the price. Okay, and it might be a method statement. How are we going to build this building? It might be, these are the people that we're going to put on the project. Okay, and I have seen in bid documents, the CVs, the resumes of the company's people that are going to go into the project. And I have seen my ex-students' resumes being put into bid documents, and I'm thinking, oh, I know that person. I wouldn't put their resume in. But that is about building confidence with the company that you're trying to pitch it. So it may be based on more than the price. That's what I'm saying. The price is important, but there are other factors as well. Tendering is generally a competitive process. So if I've got a house to build, normally I wouldn't just take it to one builder and say, can you give me a price for this project? Normally, I would say, let's have a competitive process, okay? And I will get three bids, maybe from 3 different companies, as a competitive process. It could be an open tender, okay, where an open tender or a call for tender is often published in the newspaper. So if you have a look at the newspaper, go under there's a section on under tenders, and there will be a call for tenders. And that is asking any construction company to put forward a bid or a tender. So that is open. So you've got to be careful with that, because you'll get everyone applying. Or alternatively, a selective or a closed tender. So you don't open it up to everyone, you select contractors on a selective basis. So these are contractors that you, as the owner, would have confidence in. It could be that you have worked with them before, or you know their reputation, or you know what they have built already. That builds reputation. Okay? And so you would go to that company because of that reputation. So that's a selective process, not open. So you will supply a letter of invitation. You'll send them a letter saying you are invited to tender for this project. For contractors, it should be a carefully considered process. So you now, as a contractor, you should consider, do I want to bid for this project? Against the opportunity, someone's given you an opportunity to construct their house, okay, but you need to evaluate whether or not it will be successful. And what would be a factor that might make it unsuccessful? Why wouldn't you bid? Anyone got any ideas? Someone's come to you and said, can you build my house for me? It's a very simple question. The answer is yes, of course. But is that the correct answer every time? Why not? You don't have the ability? Okay. This could be a very complicated, very fancy architect designed house with roofs doing that way and roofs doing that way and roofs doing this way and decks and glass and steel, and very complicated. You've had no experience building a house like that, but it's a good opportunity. It's a good possibility. You know, if I did this house, I might be able to do more. So you have to balance up these things. So you may have not had experience. You may not have staff. All right, because all of your staff are busy somewhere else. So you'd have to hire new people in. Can you hire? Some of the restrictions at the moment in the Auckland construction, New Zealand construction market, is there aren't the people to actually do the work. Okay, so there's another issue. So you've got to weigh up these things. So it's not just a case of saying yes. It's a case of saying, how can I do this? Yes, I can do this. Okay, I'll bid for the project. So in terms of documentation that you might receive to submit to base your bid or your tender on are these things here. So you might get a letter of invitation. You might get a form of tender. This is how we want you to tender. Okay, so for example, you know, it might be more than a price. It might be about, they want a method statement of how you're going to build it. They're wanting a schedule, a program of works. Okay, all of these things are set out in the form of tender. A contract, a form of contract. We are going to use New Zealand Standard Contract, or we're going to use New Zealand Institute of Architects contract, or we're going to use Master Builders contract, a form of contract, and the conditions of those contracts. So these so that you know what you're going into. Project drawings, yes. Specifications, yes. And in residential work, code compliance solutions, which may or may not be in the drawings. Okay, even as a contractor, even if it is not shown, even if it is not shown on the drawings, you are responsible for delivering a building that complies with the building code, even if it's not shown. So you have to understand the implications of compliance requirements. Tendering pricing documents. There may or may not be a bill of quantities or a schedule of quantities. It is very unusual in a residential house construction, particularly if it's a small development, a single house like your project's going to be, or maybe a terrace house. It is very unusual to have a schedule of quantities. A schedule of quantities is a list of all of the materials in the project. All of the materials are listed and measured. So how much? How many metres of concrete? How many metres of timber? How many metres of roofing? How many metres of insulation? Is all listed in a schedule. And that is prepared by a quantity surveyor, a surveyor who measures quantities in a building. Okay, and they measure those quantities and they list them into a schedule. You may or may not get one of those schedules for a residential project. Most commonly, you will not. You will have to do that pricing work yourself. You will have to measure the quantities and then price it yourself. So that's work that you will have to do. Right, so these are some of the tender documents. Schedules of work. There may be stipulations about how the work is to be done, and you have to allow for those things. So tender documents are the means which the owner's design are communicated. So those documents communicate to you as the tenderer what has to be built. These documents inform the contractor of the scope and detail of the project, the conditions under which the work will be executed, and they identify rights and obligations of various participants. So that's the contract. All of those things are part of the things that you will have to review in a tender submission. A documented tender bid forms the basis of the contractor's offer to construct the work. So you put in a tender bid. You are bidding along with someone else for the work. A tender bid is your submission back to the owner. So that's a very, very quick summary of tendering with some of the terms that are used. And it all sits in a context of a contract. So if you are a successful bidder or tenderer, you have said, yes, we will accept your tender or your bid. Let's move this to a contract. So we are now assuming that you have been successful in your tender bid submission. You have now the selected contractor. We are now moving to form a contract, a legal arrangement between you and me as the owner. So, as I have said, you cannot contract out of the law. You cannot ignore the law. So no matter what you might come to as a personal arrangement, the law still applies to you. And you can still go to jail, or more likely receive a nice big hefty fine. So there is behind all of this law which applies to everybody, and there is specific law that applies to construction. And it has been recently amended because of some of the difficulties. So what I'm going to go through to you is not yet a contract. We haven't signed a contract, but all of these things apply regardless of the contract. Okay? I just have to emphasise this. So no matter which way you turn, this stuff affects your life. So, for residential building work, you as the contractor, you must provide a written contract for any work over $30,000. The law says you have to have a contract. And that's including GST. Whenever you are contracting with a client, to provide a clear understanding of the obligations, requirements and expectations. That's why you have a contract. It sets out all these obligations on you, but also on the client. If I'm going to build your house, I expect to get paid. All right, and if you don't pay me, these are the remedies, or these are the things I can do, okay, to get payment from you. So these are important things. So anything over 30,000 residential, you need a contract. Before the contract is signed, or if the client requests it, you must provide. So not only is the contract, but there are some documents that you have to provide the client or the owner. The first one is a standard checklist. Frank, are they going to get access to this PowerPoint? They've got handouts, but are they going to get electronic copy?
Yes.
So in your electronic copy of my presentation, these are live links. So you click on that link. So let's see if it works. Are you on the internet here, Frank?
Yes. Find your mouse.
Okay. Oh, maybe you have to go down still.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Which one is... this one?
Yeah.
This one?
No, further down.
Down?
That one.
That one. Control?
No, it doesn't work.
What? So I can try, maybe that's because you'll become a picture, the whole thing?
Yeah, no.
That's all right, we can try.
Anyway, we'll sort that out maybe. So, I've got these links in here. Hopefully we can get them working for you. So that takes you to the checklist. So these are the things that you have to provide. In the next section, yeah. So remember, I've got there's next week there's safety, and the week after that we come back and do some more on law. So this is just an introduction, and gives you some context because we're going to talk about contracts. So there is a standard checklist, which is essentially a checklist which outlines company details, company name, okay, email addresses, telephone numbers, all of those sorts of things that are useful in terms of communication. So that's in the checklist. The other thing that you must provide is a disclosure statement. Okay, once again, we'll see if we can get that live link. The disclosure statement is about your company profile. How long have you been in business? Okay, who is the manager? Who is the director? Okay, are they licensed building practitioners? Okay, how long have you been in business? Those things have to be disclosed. Okay, so this is quite a formal framework that has now been in place since 2015. Okay, that you have to, for $30,000. So even a small alteration to your house or to anyone's house will come under these requirements.
So as you're very hard to provide those documents, builder or the owner?
The builder.
Builder.
The builder has to provide those.
So both sides will be signed in the document?
Yes, yeah. So there's a contract, there is a checklist, which is only two pages. These are not big documents. And then there's this disclosure. So it gives confidence to the owner of who they are dealing with. Have you been in business since Monday? Or have you been in business for 5 years? Okay, that gives confidence or an understanding for the owner. Okay. So this is consumer protection law. So this is law to protect the consumer. So once the building work is completed, regardless of the size of the job, you must provide certain information. And these include any ongoing maintenance requirements, any guarantees or warranties, and any ongoing insurance policies. So you must provide those. You must fix defects that you've been told about in writing within 12 months. So the responsibility of the owner is to write down and inform you what the defects are. And then it's your responsibility to fix them within 12 months. The homeowner can take action for up to 10 years when warranties in the Building Act have not been met. So if there is a failure for up to 10 years, they can take action against you. So these are things that apply to all residential work. Okay. There are also default clauses in the Building Act. Default clauses. So you have a contract which says, I am the contractor, ABC Construction Limited, I am the owner, David Dummy, here is the price, sign it, we have a contract. There are no conditions in our little contract. Or even still, I'll say, okay, I'll shake your hand. Great, we have a contract. Okay, that is a contract. How much are you going to build my house for? How much?
2 million.
Okay, done. That is a contract. He made an offer and I accepted. And we shook hands. Or I could have just said, okay, that's fine. A verbal contract. Okay, and previously, many residential projects were dealt with like that. Nothing else. An offer and acceptance. Shake hands, contract. But the Building Act says, no. There are other things now that the law says will apply, even to our shaking of hands. They'll automatically be considered to be part of your contract. If you don't have a written contract, the contract doesn't include a minimum content specified in the Building Act. So it's a one-page thing with no detail. you don't have a written contract. The default clauses in the Building Act cover issues around building consent, variations, subcontractors, notices. I can give you a notice. Please fix this. Code of compliance certificates, payments, and if I have a dispute. So these things are in the Building Act. You cannot escape New Zealand law. Okay, these things will apply to you. And once again, there is a link there that when you get the electronic version, I hope will work. So those are all given things that apply to residential contracts over 30,000, regardless of everything else. But I want to look more formally at contracts, okay, because we're going to go beyond the minimum requirement. So what are the legal obligations? What are the general and specific requirements? What are the roles and responsibilities? And what are the avenues for conflict there? So there are 4 things that I want to cover with respect to contracts today. Might cover more of this in 2 weeks' time, make it more boring for you. So a contract is an exchange of a set of obligations. A contract is an exchange, and what we've just done, you made an offer, $2 million. I know the house is only going to cost you 1.5. Anyway, you're going to do it for $2 million. I've accepted. Okay, that is an exchange, and we've established a contract with an offer and acceptance. And in that exchange, you've agreed your obligation is to build my house. My obligation is to pay you. So there are obligations on both parties. So we have a set of obligations, in our case 2. You're going to build, I'm going to pay. 2 obligations. Contracts must be designed to ensure that each party is capable of performing the obligations set out. So this goes back to our earlier discussion as to why you may not bid or tender. You cannot bid or tender because you don't have the technical capacity, you don't have the labour, okay, you're not capable of delivering the obligation. So if you're going to go into a contract, you must be capable of delivering. You must be capable of building my house, mate. All right? That's what the contract says.
agree 的，你的双方都 agree 的，说明你是准备好，你开工以后这个问题就会非常少。但是你如果觉得我明天要开工，你不给我签，我不给你开，签你干嘛？那就不行。
That will be in the exam, the test. At the end of the program, there is a test. Did he tell you about that? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. So obligations and expectations, and there must be a clear path for accomplishing those obligations. So that's a contract. So we were talking about this earlier. There are a number of standard building contracts and general conditions of contract that can be used, and I've just listed a few of them. There are many standard ones, or you can get a specific one prepared by a lawyer. Okay. So these are New Zealand standard conditions of contract. This one here, 3910, is conditions of contract for building and civil engineering, generally used for large projects. Okay, so you wouldn't use this with respect to a house project generally. There's a lot of reference to the authority of the engineer within the contract. Okay, but that is one of the main conditions of contract that are used in New Zealand for large projects. Similarly, New Zealand standards have one for housing alterations and small buildings contract, which is entirely suitable. Okay, 3902. NZIA, New Zealand Institute of Architects, NZIA, standard construction contract. NZIA SCC, standard conditions contract. And there are some links there when you get the electronic version that you can go through. This is an example. This is a filled-in example of a contract, an example of a house contract for a house to be built in Napier. So that's the conditions of contract, and then these are the standard conditions. So remember, this is the contract or the agreement, and these are the conditions that apply. Registered master builders have a contract. Certified builders have a contract. There are a number of standard contracts that you can use. However, go back to what the Building Act says, or what the law says. The legal obligations of a contract, all residential building contracts must contain a minimum amount of content. And this list is the minimum content. I'll let you read it. Okay, every residential contract must have these things in it. This is what the Building Act says. Okay, so names, addresses, date the contract signed, description of the building, which parties are responsible for obtaining building consent, payment process, dispute resolution process, how defects will be remedied, the address and location of the work, expected start and completion dates, contract price. So the price is in here amongst everything else. Payment schedule, progress payments, how variations, the price of concrete, the price of timber goes up, how are we going to do that? Notices and certificates being given to other parties. An acknowledgement that the client has received the checklist and disclosure statement, which I talked about earlier. So that's a minimum. The Building Act says that has to be in. If you go to a lawyer, the lawyer will add a lot more stuff. But that's the minimum. That will get you through a project. Oops, went the wrong way. So that is the actual contract. I'm talking about the agreement, the legal agreement. But besides the legal agreement, there is a whole lot of conditions as well, conditions of contract. So we have the agreement signed, and then we have the conditions, which are part of the contract, but set out more detail about how you're going to build the work. So the conditions under which you're going to deliver the project. So typically, general conditions of contract include these things. Okay, general responsibilities, control of employees, separate contractors, okay, or subcontractors, care of the work and site, materials, labour and plant. Who is going to supply the material? Who owns the material? So, I'll give you an example. You know that for major buildings now in New Zealand, the supply chain is very long, the supply chain. So I am going to buy some windows for my building. I'm the contractor. I'm going to buy the windows. And I'll give you an example, and that's the Manukau Institute of Technology building out in Manukau City with a railway station that sits underneath it. This is a real example. So I will, as a contractor, I will buy my windows in China. So my supply chain reaches to China. Who knows where they were manufactured? A city in China somewhere. All right. Now, a large project, they are progressively manufacturing all the windows and shipping them to New Zealand. So, who owns the windows? Who owns the windows? The manufacturer in China, right, owns the windows when they're in the factory. What about when they puts them in the container and puts them on the ship? Still is? No, that's the contractor. They're now the contractors. All right, he's bought them. All right. So once they leave the manufacturer's plant, the contractor owns them. This is what the contract says. Okay. Or then what happens when they are in New Zealand? Who owns them? What happens when they get delivered to site? And what happens when the windows get fixed into the building? When the windows are fixed into the building, the ownership changes to the owner of the building. Okay, once they are fixed on site, ownership transfers. So it goes from the manufacturer to the contractor to the owner as a supply chain, depending on where they are. Right, in the case of that building in Manukau City, the contractor went into liquidation. All right, they ceased trading. And so who owns these windows that are in transit? Some of the windows were owned by the manufacturer sitting in China. The ones on the ship, who owned those? Big question. The ones in the building, who owns those? So this is what the contract will talk about. Okay, so something as simple as material, labour and plant, it's also a question of these complex shifts in the ownership. So these are the things that may be in the contract conditions. So possession of the site as a contractor. When can you occupy the site? So we just entered an agreement, right? You're going to build my house for $2 million. Okay, and you want to start next week, and I'm saying, no. I don't own the land yet. I'm still completing the purchase of the land. You can't start next week. Okay, so I might say, no, you can't start for 1 month. All right, and so there's a date when you can take possession of the land for the work. So the date of possession. Okay, is possession of the site by the contractor. When can the contractor move on to the land? Care of the works and site. So you have a duty of care to protect the work and to protect the site. Protection of people and property. Okay. So I've had experience, a house in Parnell, which had a big excavation, a big excavation into the side of a bank, into the side sloping land. The owner wanted a big basement. Problem was, there was a house on that side, there was a house on this side, and there was a house at the top. Right? And the contractor was going to build this big excavation. And so the engineer had designed very carefully how it should be excavated and how it should be protected or retained, how the land should be retained. Okay, and typically in a case like this, it will be done in stages or sections. So you'll do this piece, put in some protection, move to the next piece, put in some protection, move to the next piece. So you'll do it in sections. So you are managing the risk. On this project, the contractor said, "Oh, no, that's too slow and too expensive. I am going to do the whole excavation, dig out the entire site in one go. Very, very efficient. I can complete this excavation in 2 days. Have a lot of trucks, 2 diggers, I can dig it out in 2 days." Which is exactly what he did. Ignored what was in the contract, ignored the drawings, just decided to do this big excavation. Finished it on Friday afternoon. Great. Started raining on Sunday. And what happened on Sunday night?
The next door house.
Absolutely. That's exactly that. The house at the top, the excavation caved in. It gave way and the house moved. Oh, problem. So back to the contract. Okay. So there is a responsibility under this very simple clause here. This is one area, the protection of persons and property. So the contractor had failed to protect the people next door and failed to protect the property by doing this big excavation, which was contrary or different from what the drawings said. So in that case there, it would go back to the contract and back to the insurance company. Who pays, who fixes. Interestingly, in this list of general conditions, there is a specific mention of safety. So there's an obligation on you to have a safety plan. So in addition to the contracting parties, these are the contracting parties, the owner, me, and you, the builder. Those are the contracting parties. We've just made a contract, but there may be other parties or other people that are referred to under the contract, who have authority under the contract. So while we are the principal parties, there are other people that are part of the contract and who have authority. Typically, these people are engineer or architect. Okay, depending on which sort of contract you have. Okay, if you have an NZIA contract, the duty this will be the architect. If you're under, New Zealand standard, it will be the engineer, whoever the engineer is. These people have responsibilities under the contract. Their responsibilities that they may have under the general conditions would be about inspection. They can inspect the work, they can record and measure, and they can test the work. So an engineer may inspect that the reinforcing steel is in the correct place. The engineer can request to see the test certificates on the concrete to make sure that the concrete is the right strength. So these are responsibilities and that are exercised under the contract. They may issue certificates of compliance or certificates of payment. So the architect might write a certificate saying, yes, I certify that this payment can be made, progress payment. Okay, the building has got to the stage, maybe has the roof on. Okay, the architect will certify for payment as being due. So they can issue certificates. They can suspend the work for non-compliance. Stop work. This doesn't comply. Okay, they can instruct removal of defective work and ask for things to be made correct or made good. And they can give instructions for urgent work if it's something like safety, like my site with the excavation. If the engineer had known what the contractor was doing, ignoring his instructions in the drawings, the engineer would have stopped the work immediately. But in this case, in that particular case, the engineer didn't know. The contractor was doing it all by himself, without reference to anyone else. So while the owner and the builder are the principals, the parties to the contract, there are other people that have authority under the conditions of contract. So in terms of conflict resolution, the Construction Contracts Act provides a process for dealing with payments and disputes. Once again, here's another piece of legislation. Okay, this is the law that applies to you. Okay. Construction Contracts Act, and it's about dealing with payments and disputes. It protects retention money under commercial contracts. So in the commercial contract, I might claim a progress claimant of $1 million. We have completed $1 million worth of work. It has been certified by the engineer or architect. You now need to pay me $1 million. Okay, under a commercial contract, the owner will retain a percentage. So the owner will not pay $1 million, they will pay $900,000. They will keep 10%.